Hey, this is Joe from Home Studio Corner. I've been running Home Studio Corner since 2009, and while a lot of things have changed, the foundational principles of what goes into making a good recording, a good mix, those things haven't changed. So occasionally, I want to do these 101 videos to get back to the basics and to make sure that we all have a good foundation on which to build our songs and our mixes. We've all had the experience, most likely, where you've put a lot of work into something only to realize the foundation of it was terrible and the work you did on top of it just fell over, right? So if you are new to audio and recording, welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're going to cover a simple concept as relates to mixing and one of the biggest things you can focus on, especially if you're starting out. Now, if you are a crusty old veteran and you've been around Home Studio Corner and home recording for a long time, I want you to watch as well and leave comments. Let me know, is there something I didn't explain well? Is there something I left out? Is there a key piece of information missing? We could all benefit from your wisdom as well. So let's dive in. Now, if you follow me for any length of time, you might have heard me talk about my 5-step mix process. This is just the way that I've evolved as a mix engineer, and I realized I'm doing things in a certain order every time, like big picture, macro level approach to every mix, whether it's a simple guitar vocal like we're going to look at today, or whether it's a big honkin' mix with 60 tracks. And that process goes real quickly. Step 1, set up the session. Step 2, static mix, which is where we set our levels. Step 3, fix big problems. Step 4, top-down mixing. And Step 5, what I call the to-do list method, which is that final push to get everything finished. We're not going to cover all the steps today. I've covered those elsewhere. We'll talk about them more in the future. But today we're going to hone in specifically on that Step 2, which we call the static mix. In other words, setting levels. This video is all about setting levels. I've talked about this many times before, but back in the old days, like back when maybe the Beatles were making records, they called the engineers on the sessions balance engineers. And I love that term because balance is the name of the game. We balance the levels of the different tracks with volume. We also balance the frequencies, so the lows and the highs one isn't overwhelming the other. And we also balance things panning-wise, left to right. Does everything on the left? That might sound wonky. Then again, some of the Beatles stuff have the drums on the left, and it's kind of cool. Anyway, we want to achieve not symmetry, but balance. It's not that everything in the session needs to be exactly the same volume. That would be chaos. But we want to have things balanced appropriately, right? The rhythm guitar player doesn't need to be louder than the lead guitar during the solo section. They need to be balanced, right? The lead necessarily needs to be louder than everyone else so that we hear those beautiful meedly that he's playing, okay? All right, so let's dive in. Let me open up a session here. Now I'm using Persona Studio One. You can use Studio One. There's a free version called Studio One Prime, but whatever software you have for doing music should be able absolutely to handle what I'm going to show you today. So I've got 2 tracks here, and there's a link in the description below where you can download these 2 tracks. My gift to you, no subscription required. And this is a very simple vocal and guitar. So Vox stands for vocal. I believe that's like Latin or something, somebody told me once. And then AG stands for acoustic guitar. Some people write it as echo. I hate that. I don't know why. I'm like, what's an echo? Echo. Anyway, so let's make the acoustic guitar bleh. That's wonderful. All right, so we've got a very, very, very simple session here. And you may think, Joe, what could you possibly teach me about setting levels when it's just a guitar and a vocal? Funny thing. A lot, actually. So let's dive in and let's do this. So we've got 2 tracks here, right? And if we open up our mixer, we've got 2 faders for each track. In addition, I've got the ability to adjust the volume up here at the top of the channel, as well as adjusting the volume here. So rather than doing anything, let me just hit play and see what I'm hearing and volume and that kind of thing. Okay, what's the first thing you notice? A little bit quiet, right? Here is the biggest temptation you will face in your studio, especially starting out. You pull up some tracks and they're too quiet, and what do you want to do? You want to go over here and say, boink. You want to turn those faders up as loud as they'll go to get the volume up. So in the room, listening through your speakers or your headphones, it sounds louder. That makes sense logically. It is a faulty, bad way to approach doing what you're doing. It's a thing called gain staging. There are lots of different places where you can add volume, add gain, add volume level to what you're listening to. One of the places, let me show you. There's one place is here. I can add volume to the actual audio track itself. I can add volume here at the top of the channel. I can add volume here by turning up that channel. I can add volume here by turning up the main output, which is like my main mix. I can put in plugins that will add volume, and that's just all in the software. But what I'm thinking about, and probably the biggest takeaway I can give to you right now, is if you're listening and things in your mix are feeling a little quiet, rather than reaching for the faders and turning them up, which is only going to make it a lot more likely that you're going to clip on your main output. That little light's going to go off, the red light that says, oh, it's too loud, you've clipped. Rather than doing that, just turn up your speakers. So I'm going to literally turn up the speakers in my room, and it'll turn up for you as well. And it's not going to change anything in the software. I'm literally turning the volume knob up, and it solves our volume problem without changing anything inside the software itself. Here's what that sounds like. I need to find a ceiling. I need to be content. I'm on something. That's not to say there's never an appropriate time to turn things up in your software, but one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they'll do this number. Let me turn it back down. They'll take their faders, they'll turn them up real loud, and then they'll start adding more and more things to the mix and EQ and compressors, and maybe they're like, oh, it's still not loud enough, and they turn it up over here, and then they end up with clipping happening over here on the main bus. And then they say, oh no, it's clipped, what do I do? Let me show you what that would look like. Let's jack these up a little bit more. Right here. See how there's a red light there that tells me I've clipped 103 times? Then they're in this mad scramble to try to turn things back down. And it may still not be loud enough in the room because their speakers were just turned down too much. Does that make sense? Turn the speakers up. It turns everything up in the room so you can hear it more clearly without having this thing happen where you've clipped everything. Let me undo all that before I make a bigger mess of everything. Now let's talk about setting levels on these two tracks. Should you do both at the same time? Should you do one or the other? I like to start with the instruments and finish with the vocal. So I'm going to mute the vocal for now and just set level on the guitar. And one of the fun ways to do it is to just turn that thing all the way down, take a breath, and then just listen and turn it up until it feels good in the room. And that's kind of my starting point for the rest of the mix. Let's try that. Sometimes it helps to close your eyes while you do this. Did you see what happened? It clipped. I turned it up to what felt good volume-wise in the room. I literally just did the mistake that I told you not to make. I forgot to turn my speakers back up. I turned them down to show you something, and then I forgot to turn them back up. And so I was pushing the guitar, I had my eyes closed, pushed it up to what felt like a good volume in the room, and then I looked, and I had clipped like 30 times. That was not on purpose, but I'm kind of glad it happened. Let's do it again. I'm going to turn my speakers up now, then I'm going to do it again, and you'll notice I'll get to the volume I want a lot sooner than I did before. Here we go. Okay, that feels good. In the room, for me, the one thing you can't hear is what it sounds like here in my room. It's at a volume that I could still talk to you. If you were sitting next to me, I could speak to you over it. It's not blowing my hair back. Of course. It's not super loud. If you listen at super loud volumes, it just makes your ears tired and you don't hear as well. Like, it literally changes how your ears hear, and you can't listen for as long, and there's ringing and hearing damage. I listen at a nice chill volume, but loud enough for me to feel the music. So that's all I can give you there. So now I've got a decent level for the guitar. It's arbitrary. I literally just turn it up until it feels pretty good. There's that point in every mix where you push up the volume of the very first track and you just say, that feels about right. Maybe that's drums if you're doing a full band mix. Maybe that's drums and then bass and then guitars. Maybe you start with the vocals. Some people like vocals. I like to do vocals last. But it's that first volume you set is fairly arbitrary, and then you build everything around it. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the vocal. I'm going to unmute the vocal. I'm going to turn it down, and I'm going to turn it up until it feels like it sits well with the guitar. I want the guitar to stay where it is, so it will, but I could turn the vocal up and get it sitting just above that guitar so I can hear the vocal and the guitar and they feel like they're balanced together. One's not too loud, one's not too quiet. Let's do that.
I need to be content. I'm on something. Yeah, I'm on something. But when I chase this feeling, the longing won't relent. I'm on something.
Okay.
Yeah.
That feels pretty good. I pushed it up. It was a little too loud, so I pulled it down a little bit, but that feels about right. And if we look, we can see the vocal is at plus 1.9 and the guitar is at -1. So the difference between them is about 3 decibels, 3 dB. That's that measurement there. But really, we just pushed the guitar up until it felt good, then we pushed the vocal up until it felt a little bit better. Now, what you're going to find is, if you just look at the vocal, there are parts where I sing really loud and parts where I sing really quiet. We're not going to solve that problem with this fader move. That's one of the big problems we solve in step 3 with things like compression and EQ. But for now, we're just trying to find that happy medium where the vocal feels pretty good at all volumes. And I think we found it here.
I need to find a ceiling. I need to be content. I'm on something.
I want those quieter parts to still be heard. Those louder parts are a little bit too loud, but I know down the road, we're going to put a thing called a compressor on there that's going to turn those loud parts down and leave everything else kind of as is. So that's why I'm setting the level here where it is. So it may seem like this is just ridiculously simple and straightforward, and in some ways it is. But I mean, look at all the steps we had to take to do this just for a guitar and a vocal. Now imagine you've got 24 tracks where you've got a bunch of drum tracks and bass and guitars and other guitars and vocals and keyboards and background vocals. You can see how this starts to feel really overwhelming. If you're one of the crusty veterans and you've done this 1,000 times, it doesn't feel overwhelming to you anymore. But think back to the first time you sat in front of a mix with 20, 30, 40 tracks, and you might remember, whew, you just don't know where to start. This is how I would start. I would pick something to be my baseline, B-A-S-E, and turn that up first, and then I would build everything around it. And if at some point you clip your main output, start over. Turn your speakers up a little bit louder so you don't have to push the faders on your channels as loud, and do it again. And what you'll find is you'll start massaging these faders when you have more than just 2 tracks and finding these great levels for everything. And before you know it, it sounds pretty good. And guess what? You haven't thrown a single plugin on there yet. No EQ, no compression. You've probably heard problems. You probably thought, some reverb there would be cool. That guitar sounds weird. I probably need to fix that somehow. But you don't fix it yet. You continue down that path of setting those levels and getting everybody to their proper place in the mix. Then we can go into step 3, which is fix those problems that you heard while you were doing the static mix. A lot of people jump into problem solving too soon. Let's get the levels and the balance right, then we can problem solve to our heart's content, which may take a few minutes, may take a few hours. Doesn't matter. Let's not rush to grab plugins to solve problems that may or may not be problems yet. We won't know what the big problems are until we've put everything into the mix and we've listened to it as a whole. That shaker track that sounds weird by itself might sound perfect in the mix and may not need a thing. So won't you be glad that you didn't go spend 30 minutes EQing and compressing a shaker track only to find that it didn't make a difference in the overall big mix. That's the idea. That's kind of the minimalist approach that I teach and that I use when it comes to mixing songs. Okay, that's it for this video. The link below in the description will have just a Dropbox link for these files. Feel free to download them and mess with them yourself. My gift to you, if you like what you've seen here and you want to know more about my 5-step mix guide, I have a free PDF. It's like just a couple of pages that explains this process. You can print it out, have it at your desk to refer back to when you go to mix a song, and before long it'll become like riding a bike and you'll just do mixing this way and you won't need the handout. But you can get that for free as well. Go to 5stepmix.com, enter your email, I'll send you a copy, and happy mixing. Thanks for watching. See ya.